The assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963 has spurred numerous conspiracy theories, which include accusations of involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, sitting Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or even some combination thereof. Some conspiracy theories further claim that the United States federal government covered up crucial information in the aftermath of the assassination. Former Los Angeles District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi estimated that a total of 42 groups, 82 assassins, and 214 people had been accused at one time or another in various conspiracy scenarios. In 1964, the Warren Commission concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person responsible for assassinating Kennedy. In 1979, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, concluded that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, although it did not identify any individuals or groups. The HSCA reasoned that a second gunman other than Oswald probably also fired at Kennedy, but acoustic evidence which the HSCA accepted in reaching its conclusions was later discredited by experts. Other federal and municipal investigations have been conducted, most of which support the conclusions reached in the Warren Commission report. Nonetheless, a majority of Americans polled indicated a belief in some sort of conspiracy. Background: President John F. Kennedy was assassinated by gunfire as he traveled in a motorcade in an open-top limousine in Dallas, Texas, on Friday, November 22, 1963, 12:30 p.m., CST. Texas Governor John Connally was wounded during the shooting, but survived. Within 2 hours, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for the murder of Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit and arraigned that evening. Shortly after 1:30 a.m., Saturday, Oswald was arraigned for murdering President Kennedy as well. On Sunday, November 24, at 11:21 a.m., nightclub owner Jack Ruby fatally shot Oswald as he was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. Immediately after the shooting, many people suspected that the assassination was part of a larger plot, and broadcasters speculated that Dallas right-wingers were involved. Ruby's shooting of Oswald compounded initial suspicions. Among conspiracy theorists, Mark Lane has been described as writing the first literary shot with his article, Defense Brief for Oswald, in the December 19, 1963, edition of the National Guardian. Thomas Buchanan's Who Killed Kennedy, published in May 1964, has been credited as the first book alleging a conspiracy. In 1964, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone and that no credible evidence supported the contention that he was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate the president. The commission also indicated that Dean Rusk, the Secretary of State, Robert S. McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, C. Douglas Dillon, the Secretary of the Treasury, Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, J. Edgar Hoover, the Director of the FBI, John A. McCone, the Director of the CIA, and James J. Rowley, the Chief of the Secret Service, each independently reached the same conclusion on the basis of information available to them. During the trial of Clay Shaw in 1969, however, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison challenged the single bullet theory with evidence from the Zapruder film, which he claimed indicated that a fourth shot from the grassy knoll was responsible for Kennedy's fatal head wound. In 1979, the United States House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, agreed with the Warren Commission that Oswald assassinated Kennedy, but concluded that the Commission's report and the original FBI investigation were seriously flawed. The HSCA concluded that at least 4 shots were fired with a high probability that 2 gunmen fired at the president, and that a conspiracy was probable. The HSCA stated that the Warren Commission failed to investigate adequately the possibility of a conspiracy to assassinate the president. The Ramsey-Clark panel and the Rockefeller Commission both supported the Warren Commission's conclusions. The last remaining documents which were required to be released under Section 5 of the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 were released on October 26, 2017, while the remaining ones still classified will only be analyzed for redactions. Public opinion. According to author John McAdams, the greatest and grandest of all conspiracy theories is the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory. Others have frequently referred to it as the mother of all conspiracies. The number of books written about the assassination of Kennedy has been estimated to be in the range of 1,000 to 2,000. According to Vincent Bugliosi, 95% of those books are pro-conspiracy and anti-Warren Commission. Author David Krajicek describes Kennedy assassination enthusiasts as belonging to conspiracy theorists on one side and debunkers on the other. The great amount of controversy surrounding the event has led to bitter disputes between those who support the conclusion of the Warren Commission and those who reject it, or are critical of the official explanation, with each side leveling toward the other accusations of naivete, cynicism, and selective interpretation of the evidence. Public opinion polls have consistently shown that a majority of Americans believe there was a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. However, on the question of a government cover-up, different polls show both a minority and majority of Americans who believe the government engaged in one. These same polls also show that there is no agreement on who else may have been involved. A 2003 Gallup poll reported that 75% of Americans do not believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. That same year, an ABC News poll found that 70% of respondents suspected that the assassination involved more than one person. A 2004 Fox News poll found that 66% of Americans thought there had been a conspiracy, while 74% thought there had been a cover-up. As recently as 2009, some 76% of people polled for CBS News said they believed the president had been killed as the result of a conspiracy. A Gallup poll released in 2013 found that 61% of Americans, the lowest figure in nearly 50 years, believed others beside Oswald were involved. Possible evidence of a cover-up. Numerous researchers, including Mark Lane, Henry Hurt, Michael L. Kurtz, Gerald D. McKnight, Anthony Summers, Harold Weisberg, and others have pointed out what they characterize as inconsistencies, oversights, exclusions of evidence, errors, changing stories, or changes made to witness testimony in the official Warren Commission investigation, which they say could suggest a cover-up. Michael Benson wrote that the Warren Commission received only information supplied to it by the FBI, and that its purpose was to rubber stamp the lone gunman theory. Richard Schweiker, United States Senator and member of the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, told author Anthony Summers in 1978, "I believe that the Warren Commission was set up at the time to feed pabulum to the American public for reasons not yet known, and that one of the biggest cover-ups in the history of our country occurred at that time." James H. Fetzer took issue with a 1998 statement from federal judge John R. Tunheim, the chair of the Assassination Records Review Board, ARRB, who stated that no smoking guns indicating a conspiracy or cover-up were discovered during their efforts in the early 1990s to declassify documents related to the assassination. Fetzer identified 16 smoking guns that he claims prove the official narrative is impossible, and therefore a conspiracy and cover-up occurred. He claims that evidence released by the ARRB substantiates these concerns. These include problems with bullet trajectories, the murder weapon, the ammunition used, inconsistencies between the Warren Commission's account and the autopsy findings, inconsistencies between the autopsy findings and what was reported by witnesses at the scene of the murder, eyewitness accounts that conflict with X-rays taken of the president's body, indications that the diagrams and photos of the president's brain in the National Archives are not the president's, testimony by those who took and processed the autopsy photos that the photos were altered, created, or destroyed, indications that the Zapruder film had been tampered with, allegations that the Warren Commission's version of events conflicts with news reports from the scene of the murder, an alleged change to the motorcade route that facilitated the assassination, an alleged lax Secret Service and local law enforcement security, and statements by people who claim that they had knowledge of, or participated in, a conspiracy to kill the president. In 1966, Roscoe Drummond voiced skepticism about a cover-up in his syndicated column. If there were a conspiracy to cover up the truth about the assassination, it would have to involve the Chief Justice, the Republican, Democratic, and non-party members of the Commission, the FBI, the CIA, the Secret Service, the distinguished doctors of the armed services and the White House, a conspiracy so multiple and complex that it would have fallen of its own weight. Allegations of witness tampering, intimidation, and foul play. Alleged witness intimidation. Richard Beyer wrote that many witnesses whose statements pointed to a conspiracy were either ignored or intimidated by the Warren Commission. In JFK, The Last Dissenting Witness, a 1992 biography of Gene Hill, Bill Sloan wrote that Arlen Specter, assistant counsel for the Warren Commission, attempted to humiliate, discredit, and intimidate Hill into changing her story. Hill also told Sloan that she was abused by Secret Service agents, harassed by the FBI, and was the recipient of death threats. A later book by Sloan, JFK, Breaking the Silence, quotes several assassination eyewitnesses as saying that Warren Commission interviewers repeatedly cut short or stifled any comments casting doubt on the conclusion that Oswald acted alone. In his book Crossfire, Jim Marrs gives accounts of several people who said they were intimidated by FBI agents, or intimidated by anonymous individuals, into altering or suppressing what they knew about the assassination, including Richard Carr, Aquila Clemens, Sandy Speaker, and A.J. Milliken. Marrs also wrote that Texas School Book Depository employee Joe Molina was intimidated by authorities and lost his job soon after the assassination, and that witness Ed Hoffman was warned by an FBI agent that he might get killed if he revealed what he had observed in Dealey Plaza on the day of the assassination. Witness deaths. Allegations of mysterious or suspicious deaths of witnesses connected with the Kennedy assassination originated with Penn Jones, Jr., and were brought to national attention by the 1973 film Executive Action. Jim Marrs later presented a list of 103 people he believed died convenient deaths under suspicious circumstances. He noted that the deaths were grouped around investigations conducted by the Warren Commission, New Orleans DA Jim Garrison, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Marrs pointed out that these deaths certainly would have been convenient for anyone not wishing the truth of the JFK assassination to become public. In 2013, Richard Belzer published Hit List, an in-depth investigation into the mysterious deaths of witnesses to the JFK assassination that examines the deaths of 50 people linked to the assassination and claims they were murdered as part of a cover-up. Vincent Bugliosi described the death of journalist Dorothy Kilgallen, who said she was granted a private interview with Jack Ruby, as perhaps the most prominent mysterious death cited by assassination researchers. According to author Jerome Croth, Mafia figures Sam Giancana, John Rosselli, Carlos Prio, Jimmy Hoffa, Charles Nicoletti, Leo Massari, Richard Kane, Salvatore Granello, and Dave Yeras were likely murdered to prevent them from revealing their knowledge. According to author Matthew Smith, others with some tie to the case who have died suspicious deaths include Lee Bowers, Gary Underhill, William Sullivan, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, George de Morinskild, 4 showgirls who worked for Jack Ruby, and Ruby himself. The House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated another alleged mysterious death, that of Rose Cherami. The committee reported that Louisiana State Police Lieutenant Francis Fruch traveled to Eunice, Louisiana, on November 20, 1963, 2 days before the assassination, to pick up Cherami, who had sustained minor injuries when she was hit by a car. Fruch drove Cherami to the hospital and said that on the way there, she related to that she was coming from Florida to Dallas with 2 men who were Italians or resembled Italians. Fruch asked her what she planned to do in Dallas, to which she replied, "Number 1, pick up some money, pick up baby, and kill Kennedy." Cherami was admitted and treated at State Hospital in Jackson, Louisiana for alcohol and heroin addiction. State Hospital physician Dr. Victor Weiss later told a House Select Committee investigator that on November 25, 3 days after the assassination, one of his fellow physicians told him that Cherami had stated before the assassination that President Kennedy was going to be killed. Dr. Weiss further reported that Cherami told him after the assassination that she had worked for Jack Ruby and that her knowledge of the assassination originated from word in the underworld. After the assassination, Lieutenant Fruch contacted Dallas Police Captain Will Fritz regarding what he had learned from Cherami, but Fritz told him he wasn't interested. Cherami was found dead by a highway near Big Sandy, Texas, on September 4, 1965. She had been run over by a car. Another suspicious death cited by Jim Marrs was that of Joseph Miltier, director of the Dixie Clan of Georgia. Miltier was secretly tape-recorded 13 days before the assassination telling Miami police informant William Somerset that the murder of Kennedy was in the working. Miltier died in 1974 when a heater exploded in his house. The House Select Committee on Assassinations reported in 1979 that Miltier's information on the threat to the president was furnished the agents making the advance arrangements before the visit of the president to Miami, but that the Miltier threat was ignored by Secret Service personnel in planning the trip to Dallas. Robert Buch, special agent in charge of the Secret Service's Protective Research Section, testified that threat information was transmitted from one region of the country to another if there was specific evidence it was relevant to the receiving region. The House Select Committee on Assassinations investigated the allegation that a statistically improbable number of individuals with some direct or peripheral association with the Kennedy assassination died as a result of that assassination, thereby raising the specter of conspiracy. The committee's chief of research testified, "Our final conclusion on the issue is that the available evidence does not establish anything about the nature of these deaths which would indicate that the deaths were in some manner, either direct or peripheral, caused by the assassination of President Kennedy or by any aspect of the subsequent investigation." Author Gerald Posner said that Marrs' list was taken from the group of about 10,000 people connected even in the most tenuous way to the assassination, including people identified in the official investigations, as well as the research of conspiracy theorists. Posner also said that it would be surprising if 100 people out of 10,000 did not die in unnatural ways. He noted that over half of the people on Marrs' list did not die mysteriously, but of natural causes, such as Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, who died of heart failure at age 69 in 1984, long after the Kennedy assassination, but is on Marrs' list as someone whose cause of death is unknown. Posner also pointed out that many prominent witnesses and conspiracy researchers continue to live long lives. Allegations of evidence suppression, tampering, and fabrication. Allegations that the evidence against Oswald was planted, forged, or tampered with is a main argument among those who believe a conspiracy took place. Suppression of evidence. Ignored testimony. Some assassination researchers assert that witness statements indicating a conspiracy were ignored by the Warren Commission. In 1967, Josiah Thompson stated that the commission ignored the testimony of 7 witnesses who saw gunsmoke in the area of the stockade fence on the grassy knoll, as well as an 8th witness who smelled gunpowder at the time of the assassination. In 1989, Jim Marrs wrote that the commission failed to ask for the testimony of witnesses on the triple overpass whose statements pointed to a shooter on the grassy knoll. Confiscated film and photographs. Other researchers reported that witnesses who captured the assassination in photographs or on film had their cameras and/or film confiscated by police or other authorities. Author Jim Marrs and documentary producer Nigel Turner presented the account of Gordon Arnold, who said that his film of the motorcade was taken by two policemen shortly after the assassination. Another witness, Beverly Oliver, came forward in 1970 and said she was the babushka lady who is seen, in the Zapruder film, filming the motorcade. She said that after the assassination she was contacted at work by two men who she thought were either FBI or Secret Service agents. According to Oliver, the men told her that they wanted to develop her film and would return it to her within 10 days, but they never returned the film. Withheld documents. Richard Beyer and others have complained that many documents pertaining to the assassination have been withheld over the years, including documents from the Warren Commission investigation, the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation, and the Church Committee investigation. These documents at one time included the president's autopsy records. Some documents are still not scheduled for release until 2029. Many documents were released during the mid to late 1990s by the Assassination Records Review Board under the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. However, some of the material released contains redacted sections. Tax return information, which would identify employers and sources of income, has not yet been released. The existence of large numbers of secret documents related to the assassination, and the long period of secrecy, suggests to some the possibility of a cover-up. One historian noted, there exists widespread suspicion about the government's disposition of the Kennedy assassination records stemming from the beliefs that federal officials, 1. have not made available all government assassination records, even to the Warren Commission, Church Committee, House Assassination Committee, and, 2. have heavily redacted the records released under FOIA in order to cover up sinister conspiracies. According to the Assassination Records Review Board, all Warren Commission records, except those records that contain tax return information, are, now, available to the public with only minor redactions. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request filed by journalist Jefferson Morley, the CIA stated that it had approximately 1,100 JFK assassination-related documents, about 2,000 pages in total, that have not been released for reasons of national security. Tampering with evidence. Some researchers have alleged that various items of physical evidence have been tampered with, including the single bullet, also known as the magic bullet by some critics of official explanations, various bullet cartridges and fragments, the limousine's windshield, the paper bag in which the Warren Commission said Oswald hid the rifle, the so-called backyard photos that depict Oswald holding the rifle, the Zapruder film, the photographs and radiographs obtained at Kennedy's autopsy, and Kennedy's body itself. Photographs. Among the evidence against Oswald are the photographs of Oswald posing in his backyard with a Carcano rifle, the weapon identified by the Warren Commission as the assassination weapon. The House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that the photographs of Oswald are genuine, and Oswald's wife, Marina, said that she took them. In 2009, the journal Perception published the findings of Hani Farid, a professor in the Department of Computer Science at Dartmouth College, who used 3D modeling software to analyze one of the photographs. After demonstrating that a single light source could create seemingly incongruent shadows, Farid concluded that the photograph revealed no evidence of tampering. Many researchers, including Robert Groden, assert that these photos are fake. In 1979, after the HSCA had disbanded, Groden said that 4 autopsy photographs showing the back of Kennedy's head were forged in order to hide a wound created by a bullet fired from a second gunman. According to Groden, a photograph of a cadaver's head was inserted over another depicting a large exit wound in the back of Kennedy's head. G. Robert Blakey, chief counsel for the HSCA, replied to the allegations stating the suggestion that the committee would participate in a cover-up is absurd and that Groden was not competent to make a judgment on whether a photograph has been altered. Blakey stated the photographic analysis panel for the committee had examined the photographs and that they considered everything had to say and rejected it. The Zapruder film. The House Select Committee on Assassinations described the Zapruder film as the best available photographic evidence of the number and timing of the shots that struck the occupants of the presidential limousine. The Assassination Records Review Board said it is perhaps the single most important assassination record. According to Vincent Bugliosi, the film was originally touted by the vast majority of conspiracy theorists as incontrovertible proof of conspiracy but is now believed by many assassination researchers to be a sophisticated forgery. Among those who believe the Zapruder film has been altered are John Costella, James H. Fetzer, David Lifton, David Mantic, Jack White, Noel Twyman, and Harrison Livingstone, who has called it the biggest hoax of the 20th century. In 1996, Roland Zavada, a former product engineer for Kodak, was requested by the Assassination Records Review Board to undertake a thorough technical study of the Zapruder film. Zavada concluded that there was no detectable evidence of manipulation or image alteration on the Zapruder in-camera original. David Lifton wrote that the Zapruder film was in the possession of the CIA's National Photographic Interpretation Center by the night of the assassination. Jack White, researcher and photographic consultant to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, claimed that there are anomalies in the Zapruder film, including an unnatural jerkiness of movement or change of focus, in certain frame sequences. Kennedy's body. In his 1981 book Best Evidence, David Lifton presented the thesis that President Kennedy's body had been altered between the Dallas hospital and the autopsy site at Bethesda for the purposes of creating erroneous conclusions about the number and direction of the shots. Fabrication of evidence. Murder weapon. The Warren Commission found that the shots that killed Kennedy and wounded Connally were fired from the Italian 6.5 mm Carcano rifle owned by Oswald. Deputy Sheriff Eugene Boone and Deputy Constable Seymour Weitzman both initially identified the rifle found in the Texas School Book Depository as a 7.65 Mauser. Weitzman signed an affidavit the following day describing the weapon as a 7.65 Mauser bolt action equipped with a 4/18 scope, a thick leather brownish-black sling on it. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig claimed that he saw 7.65 Mauser stamped on the barrel of the weapon. But when interviewed in 1968 by Barry Ernest, author of The Girl on the Stairs: The Search for a Missing Witness to the JFK Assassination, Craig said, "I felt then and I still feel now that the weapon was a 7.65 German Mauser. I was there. I saw it when it was first pulled from its hiding place, and I am not alone in describing it as a Mauser." So, in the videotaped interview he said he read Mauser on the rifle, and to Ernest he said that he felt it was a Mauser. Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade told the press that the weapon found in the book depository was a 7.65 Mauser, and this was reported by the media. But investigators later identified the rifle as a 6.5 mm Carcano. In Matrix for Assassination, author Richard Gilbride suggested that both weapons were involved and that Dallas Police Captain Will Fritz and Lieutenant J. Carl Day might have been conspirators. Addressing speculation and rumors, the Warren Commission identified Weitzman as the original source of the speculation that the rifle was a Mauser and stated that police laboratory technicians subsequently arrived and correctly identified the weapon as a 6.5 Italian rifle. Bullets and cartridges. The Warren Commission determined that 3 bullets were fired at Kennedy. One of the 3 bullets missed the vehicle entirely, another bullet hit Kennedy, passed through his body and then struck Governor John Connally, and the third bullet was the fatal headshot to the president. Some claim that the bullet that passed through President Kennedy's body before striking Governor Connally, dubbed by critics of the commission as the magic bullet, was missing too little mass to account for the total weight of bullet fragments later found by the doctors who operated on Connally. Those making this claim included Connally's chief surgeon, Dr. Robert Shaw, as well as two of the Kennedy autopsy surgeons, Commander James Humes, and Lieutenant Colonel Pierre Fink. However, in the book 6 Seconds in Dallas, author Josiah Thompson took issue with this claim. Thompson added up the weight of the bullet fragments listed in the doctor reports and concluded that their total weight could have been less than the mass missing from the bullet. With Connally's death in 1993, forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht and the Assassination Archives and Research Center petitioned Attorney General Janet Reno to recover the remaining bullet fragments from Connally's body, contending that the fragments would disprove the Warren Commission's single bullet, single gunman conclusion. The Justice Department replied that it would have no legal authority to recover the fragments unless Connally's family gave permission. Connally's family refused permission. Allegations of multiple gunmen. The Warren Commission concluded that 3 shots were fired in a time period ranging from approximately 4.8 to in excess of 7 seconds. Some assassination researchers, including Anthony Summers, dispute the Commission's findings. They point to evidence that brings into question the number of shots fired, the origin of the shots, and the ability of Oswald to accurately fire 3 shots in a short amount of time. These researchers suggest the involvement of multiple gunmen. Number of shots. Based on the consensus among the witnesses at the scene and in particular the 3 spent cartridges, the Warren Commission determined that the preponderance of the evidence indicated that 3 shots were fired. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded there were 4 shots, 1 coming from the direction of the grassy knoll. The Warren Commission, and later the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded that one of the shots hit President Kennedy in the back of his neck, exited his throat, continued on to strike Governor Connally in the back, exited Connally's chest, shattered his right wrist, and embedded itself in his left thigh. This conclusion came to be known as the single bullet theory. Mary Mormon said in a TV interview immediately after the assassination that there were 3 or 4 shots close together, that shots were still being fired after the fatal head shot, and that she was in the line of fire. In 1967, Josiah Thompson concluded that 4 shots were fired in Dealey Plaza, with 1 wounding Connally and 3 hitting Kennedy. On the day of the assassination, Nellie Connally was seated in the presidential car next to her husband, Governor John Connally. In her book From Love Field, Our Final Hours, Nellie Connally said that she believed that her husband was hit by a bullet that was separate from the 2 that hit Kennedy. Origin of the shots. The Warren Commission concluded that all of the shots fired at President Kennedy came from the 6th floor window at the southeast corner of the Texas School Book Depository. The Commission based its conclusion on the cumulative evidence of eyewitnesses, firearms, and ballistic experts and medical authorities, including on-site testing, as well as analysis of films and photographs conducted by the FBI and the U.S. Secret Service. In 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations agreed to publish a report from Warren Commission critic Robert Groden, in which he named nearly dozen suspected firing points in Dealey Plaza. These sites included multiple locations in or on the roof of the Texas School Book Depository, the Daltex Building, and the Dallas Coup.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.